I'm telling you, I've always looked at software development as a canary in the coal mine for what's happening in knowledge work. Look at my own use case, because what makes AI really good at software development also makes it really good at knowledge work. I think the reason we fail in the knowledge work world is because we're stuck down in that bottom 20% of that stack. And like maybe AI isn't good at building all these automations, and computer using agents are getting confused. And it's like, well, how can my AI do this if it can't even click Excel properly? I'm like, who cares? I can click Excel. I don't need AI to do that. Like, it's this 80% up here where the real money is. And that has been instantly changed. Like for me, when I started using AI like this second brain, it was probably within like 2 hours where I was like, oh my God. And like within 2 days, I'm like, I'm never working the old way again. Like never.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest Liquidware Chats. So this episode, we are talking about EUC and AI. So I decided who else could I have on but Brian Madden, who's made the transition from EUC into AI. So Brian, back in 2012, you wrote a book called The VDI Delusion. You called out the entire industry essentially for kind of believing its own marketing. Is AI the new VDI, and are we in an AI illusion now?
Great softball questions to kick this thing off with, James. Oh my gosh. Well, hey, thanks for the invitation to be on the show. And I love talking about this kind of stuff. Yeah, okay. So the VDI Delusion, which I cannot believe was written now 14 years ago.
We're both getting old.
there's something that there was a need that existed back in that era, and which is, because previous to that, most corporate work was done on a Windows PC. That Windows PC was sort of stuck in the office, and then we had people working from home. We had people working like on mobile devices and all these different things. And the people wanted to work everywhere, and they wanted to work in their way. They wanted to use like a Mac, and they wanted to use iPhones and all these cloud apps and just kind of work wherever. And corporations like fundamentally didn't have a problem with that, but they wanted to like control it and have it be secure and their existing applications and keep all the guardrails on. And so VDI was sort of the best approach the companies had. Like it was solving the right, it was aspirationally trying to solve the right problems, but it's just solving it in the wrong way. And so when you looked at people who were selling VDI, it was like, oh, work from anywhere and be secure from anywhere. And like those things are actually true, but the product that was being delivered was not what workers wanted to use. So the need was real. The solution was like the wrong solution. And by the way, in the ensuing 14 years since that book was written, we, as the industry, Liquidware, Citrix, hundreds of other companies have sort of figured out there are other ways without VDI to manage your workers, allow them to securely work from anywhere. And so now, like I work at Citrix and I work remotely sort of every day, and I never use VDI because there are other ways to solve this. So it's not that VDI is bad technology. VDI solves a specific need, and it solves it very, very well. And VDI is successful today because it's being used like kind of where it's meant to be used, not trying to solve every problem, for everybody. So tying that to AI now, it's sort of the same thing. Like there's a need that needs to be solved, and there's vendors who want to help solve it. And I think there is still a disconnect. One of the things is, so like fundamentally, workers want to work how they want to work. Like today, workers want to use AI tools. They want to use, it doesn't matter what, ChatGPT or Claude or whatever they're using.
Yeah.
Some workers are using it like as a fancier Google, basically an answer engine. Some workers have just completely redone their workflow and turned AI into like an extension of their brain and are using it for everything. That's where I am. We'll talk about that later, I'm sure. And so it's still the sort of thing. Like there's workers want to work in the way that they want to work, and the corporation is saying, "Whoa, let's calm down here and try to work within these certain guardrails." And so there are some companies who are trying to like limit what workers can do to the bounds of what their technology can do today. And in that sense, you have some similarities where, workers are wanting to do things one way and the company wants to control them a different way. But it doesn't have to be that way, just like with VDI. And so some companies are really more enlightened about how they enable and secure their work. So, but fundamentally, I think there's a lot of similarities in that end user computing as it is today, as it was 15 years ago, as it was 30 years ago, is all about like the user portion, like the human workers. And like we just want to work how we want to work. And, hey, company, figure it out.
Yeah. No. So just to go back a bit, as we said, you wrote this in 2012. You've been in EUC for about 30 years. You've pretty much seen it all. So now you're at Citrix as a VP and a futurist. So what does your kind of day to day look like in your current role?
You know, I mean, if you want to know actually what my day to day is, like quite literally, so I'm sitting in my house right now. I work remotely. Um, like the mechanics of my day to day is very much using AI. Um, I do use AI as a cognitive extension. So, like 90% of my interaction with the computer is through AI. And, we talk about I mean, a lot of people call this like using it like a second brain. I don't love that term because like it's not actually connected with electrodes into my into my head, but it's really
Don't know if you want that either.
I I do not. But I use AI in a way where everything I'm doing, it's seeing, it's learning, it's seeing what I write, it's pulling in reference material, it's pulling in like articles I like, podcasts. Like I just really am every meeting I have is sort of AI's mining the content out of there, and then I'm working with it on like, well, what about this idea? What about this idea? And like, how about this? What's this future look like? And I'm sort of thinking about Citrix and our position and where we're going and all these sorts of things. So like, I don't know if that's actually what you were asking me, but like in terms of what my actual day to day is, like 90% of the time that I'm interacting with a device, I'm interacting with AI. And then, if I need something, like I don't really use Microsoft Word anymore. Um, Microsoft Word to me is just a compatibility layer for my colleagues who are not yet working this way. And I need to,
Are you using MD files?
yeah. So I basically, you know, uh, I'm using Claude Code myself, but you can also
Mm,
use ChatGPT. Gemini, it doesn't matter. They're all the same.
mm.
I pointed it towards a folder on my hard drive. And I started by just importing all the stuff that I had written and published. Not forever. I don't care what I wrote about VDI 15 years ago. But the blogs, since I joined Citrix, I got like 15 blog posts. I've got like podcast guest appearances. I've got like transcripts of like presentations that I've given, and I just kind of gave it all that and said like, here's me. And then I told it like, I want you to like mine that through and find the core insights and find the core points. And then I also do like a lot of voice recordings that it transcribes. So I'm walking the dog and I'm like, Microsoft just did this. What about this? What about this? Ooh, I have an idea for this. And it can pull it. Oh, that connects here. That connects here. That connects here. And so the AI is kind of not just tracking all my stuff and like indexing it, but also pulling out ideas. And here's my story arcs. Here's my rough ideas. Here's my like vision ideas, and just kind of keeps on rolling and rolling and rolling. So not every presentation or every question that comes in, I'm able to sort of call on all of that context. And so that's the mechanics of what I'm doing.
Mm.
Maybe the question you asked, like I'm a futurist, and so
Yeah, no. So maybe that's the next bit is like you say futurist, but kind of what kind of time frame are you looking at? Are you looking at like 2 years, 5 years, or are you looking even further ahead, or can you even look that far ahead? I personally don't think you can.
no,
But
I mean a lot of it turns into sci-fi like really quickly, and then who
yeah,
knows? Because funny, this is not the point of your question, but I wrote last summer in July. I published an article like the 7 steps of human AI interaction.
yeah,
And
I
so
know.
phase
I
one,
I,
phase
I
two.
read it. Yep.
Yeah. So my phase 6, which is kind of like using AI as a cognitive extension, uh, in that article, I had predicted that's 2027 plus. And by
And you're doing it in 2026.
January of 2026, I was
Yes.
fully
Yeah.
in. And I only wrote that article 6 months prior. So
Mm.
so 6 months ago, like basically, last summer, what I projected would be like 2.5 years plus, or 1.5 years plus, whatever, turned into be less than 6 months. And
Mm.
so the time frames are just absolutely compressing with these things. And so I couldn't even, you can't even go out too far. But to your sort of real question, so like my whole role truly is thinking about what happens, like what does the future of work, I really focus on knowledge work, like what does the future of knowledge work look like? And by the way, I'm not looking at technology, so this is not about the future of VDI or the future of Citrix or the future of like virtual apps and desktops. This is like what does the future of knowledge work look like? um I mean, in my mind, I'm kind of, my horizon maybe within the next 2 years. Again, I don't know, like I can kind of see like the next several steps. I don't know if these next steps are 5 years of steps or 2 months of steps. But I'm looking at where knowledge work is going, and then thinking about, okay, in that world, what are the issues? Like, how do people work? What vendors do you use? What are you paying for? What are the constraints? What are the challenges? Like, what do workers want? What do companies want? What is governance? What is all the thing that exists in that world? And then I kind of walk it back. So, like, if this is the world that we're going to all be living in 2 years, um, like, what are the steps? Like, what are the logical steps from today to get there? And then I sort of like paint that picture and like tell stories about that. And my audience, I have an audience at Citrix, so like I talk to our executive leadership, our product managers, our general managers, our strategists, all of our product folks, our sales folks, our field folks. I also talk to our partners, like you. I talk to the community and give talks and do blogs and that kind of thing. So basically, I'm looking at, here's where I see things are going, and here's how I see we're going to progress there, and then just really share those stories as widely as I can. And in my mind, hopefully that is another data point that helps arm our product managers and engineers with the products that they're building. So I'm not a product strategist. I don't decide what we build, because of course product
Mm.
managers have to balance like what crazy Brian thinks along with like what actual customer needs are, and our business and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just an input into what they're doing. But really just to take a perspective, because a lot of product managers across the industry, you're really focused on your products and like where your products are going. And a lot of times, you're focused on the customers and where the customers are going, and you need like that wild card out there that's like, hey, here's another perspective. Let's merge this all together. And that's what I'm doing. And then of course, the fact that I use AI so much is sort of a byproduct. Like my job doesn't require it necessarily, but I am kind of mentally living in the future, and so I'm using all the products that I'm thinking about, and frankly, that helps me. Like we talked about, using AI like a cognitive extension, that has like blown my mind, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And this is what I wrote like in the Citrix blog. I'm like, oh my gosh, all knowledge work is going to be like this in 2 years. What does that mean for you? And that's what I do.
Yeah, it's uh, it must be quite crazy because you kind of, as you said, you predicted something that was going to happen in 2 years' time and has essentially happened in a lot shorter time frame. But do you think? I don't think enterprise moves that quickly. Um, and I suppose taking it back to EUC, I don't see it progressing as fast. But for numerous reasons, for things such as AI agents currently, in my opinion, are pretty unpredictable. There's been some pretty large cases of AI agents going rogue at some pretty large organizations, including one which decided to have an internal meeting yesterday about it. So it's it's pretty crazy. So, but I think one of the big kind of components when it comes to AI and EUC is the intelligence layer that you have with a lot of these monitoring solutions, including our own. And that's kind of where you can really make an impact from that layer and abstracting that data. I'm not quite sure if the AI doesn't first of all, understand what's going on. How can you get an AI to start doing tasks if it doesn't have a kind of a full kind of grasp of the environment? So, just what's your kind of view of where AI sits in EUC at this moment in time?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a few questions
Yeah.
in there. first and foremost, you talk about, yeah, like there's this thing. So there's a term in the AI nerd world called diffusion. And diffusion, I mean, maybe this is a term that was always existed, but it's used a lot in AI. So when you hear the term diffusion, that is like a technology exists and there's some time frame it takes for that technology to kind of filter its way through into organizations and into enterprises and everything. And I've been writing. I joined Citrix just over a year ago, and I've been writing since for the whole past year that I think what's happening in the consumer land of AI and what's happening in the enterprise land are kind of different, because enterprises are serious organizations and we have compliance and regulations and we have these old systems. There's still mainframes after 25 years and whatever, 50 years, whatever it is. All these
Most of
things.
our banks still run on mainframes.
Yeah. And so I was kind of like, yeah, okay, ChatGPT, that's cute. But, like
Mm.
real businesses have regulations and things are going to work more
Mhm.
slowly there. And I think to some extent that's true. But it's similar to like the consumerization of IT that we talked about, 15
Mhm.
years ago, where individual workers are discovering and using these technologies on their own. And it kind of doesn't matter what the company thinks. Like, even if the company blocks AI or says we're not allowed to use AI or you're not allowed to use ChatGPT, I mean, you can still have ChatGPT sitting on your phone, and
Yeah.
now it can listen to everything. Like, you can record your whole screen, even if you have like content protection, and like you can point your iPhone and
Mm.
block screenshots. You take snapshots. You can set your
Mm.
iPhone on your desk and record meetings while you're on them, and then it can transcribe those, and then it can start to build up. Like, if you wanted to use any individual worker who wants to use AI as the sort of cognitive exoskeleton where it just hears and understands everything I do. I mean, you can almost just put your phone in recording mode and transcription mode and just have it suck up everything you're doing all day, every
Yeah.
day. And after like 2 weeks, it's got a pretty good sense of what you're doing, completely outside the bounds of the company.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the little, you can put a bud in your ear, and even if your AI can't connect to your work applications, it's like, oh my gosh, I have to get back to James. What should I say? And it's like dictating, and I'm just typing away. And so like that's extreme, but my point is that's possible. And there's a lot of workers who are going that way. So to some degree, I say like how fast AI diffuses through corporations is a real thing that we need to think about. But also, a corporation cannot hit the brakes on this because workers are going to do what they're going to do. And so, for a corporate standpoint, you can either embrace what the workers are doing or you cannot. And I'll tell you, AI is extremely, extremely valuable, even if it does not technically have access to any of your internal stuff. Like, a lot of people just think that AI is just a DLP issue. It's not really that different than us worrying about data going to, like personal Gmail accounts and that kind of thing. And there's plenty of workers who are just starting to use ChatGPT. And as these things are getting more and more powerful, as I said, it never crosses the corporate firewall, so to speak. And yet it's still like impacting everything that the workers are doing. So um, there's that first thing where I say, like, even though things diffuse more slowly throughout corporate environments, that's not, it almost doesn't matter.
Mm.
There's another phrase like the AI, like the capabilities overhang people talk about. So capabilities that exist here, the corporation is like slowly over here. But of course, the capabilities are definitely expanding faster than the corporation
Yeah.
is embracing technologies, because structurally corporations can't really like adopt that fast. And so the overhang gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that means like, the potential difference between what capabilities exist, what happens in companies just gets more and more enticing every day. And you got more workers jumping into it. And like corporations, you just have to deal with it. Um, and so to the like sort of second part of your question, my sense is most corporations get this wrong in terms of like, well, how do you manage this and what do you do with it? And I did, I, I did some blogs. I don't know. I just want to do a sidebar as like a shameless plug for my blog on citrix.com/blogs, because the stuff we're talking about is like what I write about every week. I don't write about
Mm.
our products or product strategy. I'm truly writing about like what's happening in the world, what I'm experiencing by using AI in a very powerful way, and what the issues are that we're all going to have to deal with. And so I did this post, I don't know, a month ago, where I talk about, I call it like the 80%, 20% thing, where I say like knowledge work is interesting because like it's in the name, knowledge work. Like that's what's inside our brains. Well, most of the work that we do is inside our brains, and it's like how we like it is based on our decades of experience. And here's how we do this, and here's how I would say this, and here's what I think about this, and here's all these kinds of things. Well, the thing is that um like the company can't see inside our heads of what we're doing. The company can see the outputs of what's inside our heads. So they can see the emails, transcripts of meetings, like our whole knowledge graph, like who we talk to and like documents we write and documents we read and all
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. But it's like that's only, I'm calling it like 80% in our head, 20% is out in the world. I made up those numbers so just to illustrate the point. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, yeah.
The company can only see the 20%. And um and so the company, bless their hearts, they're trying so hard to like automate our future and do all these great things based on the little 20% that they can see. But what's really happening, the action's happening inside the workers' heads. And this to me, that concept alone is why you read these headlines that are like AI fails to transform, AI is not showing ROI, AI is like not really impacting things. People are skeptical that AI even matters in the corporate world. But yet you also hear individual workers with their $20 a month chat GPT subscriptions have like, this has fundamentally changed the way that I work. And the reason that's the case is because individual workers are applying the AI to the 80% that's inside their head. Whereas the corporations, when they apply AI, it's only to the like 20% that's visible. And so
Hmm.
I, as I thought about this and like what that difference is, I came up with this concept that I'm calling the cognitive stack. And it kind of is like the OSI model where you have like, like there's foundational, like each layer builds upon the layer on top of it.
Yep.
And every layer is important, but the value is up at the top. So at the top of the stack, you have there's five layers in this stack that I sort of came up with. The top of the stack is the worker, like that's human, like for now. Um,
Hmm.
and so like you get the human worker at the top. Then right below them is the AI that they actually engage with. Like that is their cognitive extension or their AI brain or whatever you want to call it. That is your, ChatGPT or whatever subscription that has all your context, all your knowledge, all everything, and you're just working with that all day long. So then below the cognitive extension, the next layer down is skills. So skills, all of the AI vendors have sort of standardized on this concept of skills. A skill, it's just actually a text file that describes like how to do something. So a skill might be how do you create a report? How do you create a TPS report? How do you update something? So skills are sort of underneath that. And then below skills, you have agents that actually go out and perform the work in the skills. And then below the skills, you've got the workflows, which is how you plug into the old systems and all that sort of thing. The reason I mention that is that this 80% that lives in our head is up here at the top of the stack. And the bottom of the stack is that 20% that's visible, which is the agents and the skills and all that kind of thing. Um, I mentioned how this relates sort of like the OSI model. Like remember like the 7-layer stack of OSI, and the
Yep.
top layer 7 is your
Hmm.
application layer. Like that's where all the smarts is. That's where all the money is. The lower layers are like the lower level infrastructure. Infrastructure is very important. Like layer 7 cannot exist if layers 6, 1 through 6 have to exist below it. But the like intelligence is at the top layer. So the reason I mention all this kind of stuff, and the reason I think this is so important, is those bottom layers of this cognitive stack, they're operating in that visible 20%. So
Yeah.
that is the applications I use, the automations I have, all of this kind of stuff. That's very important. It has to happen. But you can have the smartest automation layer in the world, and it's not going to like sprout up value intelligence out of the top. The way the value comes within AI in the knowledge worker world is it has to get inside this 80% of what you cannot see, which is at the top of the stack. So for me, using AI as my own cognitive extension, I'm asking it to, I need to do this. I need to prep for this podcast. I've got this briefing. I've got this thing. I've got this customer, whatever that is. And the AI is sort of operating with me at this level. And if the AI needs to do something, it's going to go through, oh, I need to update this flight, and it's going to go through Workday and its skills and its agent, and it's going to go do all these kinds of things. But focusing on this bottom 2 layers of the stack and automating down there is not really where the real sort of value occurs. And I don't
Mm.
even care about, like you talk about, okay, so the question around people are like making these automations, and like you have OpenClaw, and OpenClaw goes crazy, and like, oh, how do we get better automations, and we need to secure these things. I'm like, that's all true, but it doesn't matter. Like, the way I'm using AI has fundamentally transformed the way that I work. It's changed everything because I'm using it, as I said, an extension of my brain. It's an extension of the 80%. I almost don't care. Like, I don't need automations. Like, yes, that's great, but in my knowledge worker world, if I had the best automations on planet Earth, okay, great. I perfectly automated the 20% of the visible part of my job. The 80%, like, in my mind, I would rather have like AI transforming the 80% that I do, and automations I can do myself. I can buy my own airline ticket. Like, that's not my cognitive load, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of the issues that people have with AI is they read about how, oh, AI is going to transform knowledge work and it's going to change everything. Um, but all they know how to do is like automations. So they just like try to automate the heck out of everything and make all these automations work really, really well. And like, even if you automated everything perfectly and it's perfectly magically secure, you still haven't transformed knowledge work. So I'm not saying automations are bad. It's just like a layer two switch, like that's important in the networking stack, but let's not kid ourselves. You can have all the intelligence you want at layer two. You did not create an application delivery controller out of that. And it's the same kind of thing here. So to me, the most important thing is people understand when you're applying AI, like what level of the stack are you applying the AI at, and what's the best possible outcome. You will never automate. You will never get to like full AI powered knowledge work by having the best automations. And again, it does not mean you don't do automations. That means understand what you're working at and what the outcomes are. And I think that thing right there, like that concept, my last little 5-minute diatribe, sorry for that. You understand that unlocks everything about AI in UC. Truly, like that's the ticket.
Yeah. You've pretty much covered one of my questions I had there. Um, so what I understand what you're talking about in kind of the transformation of knowledge work, that I really get that. But what I kind of want to dig into a little bit is in EUC specifically, you know, you're talking about the various different layers, and a lot of us, our careers have been built around estates, endpoints, and how do you see AI kind of being implemented at the in those kind of type of environments?
So the other analogy I use a lot, I should actually probably fact check this because I think this analogy might be wrong, but like I call it the faster horse. I think that's related to both Steve Jobs and maybe Henry Ford or something like that, where like there's that old analogy of, before the car was invented, if you ask people what they wanted, they would just say a faster horse because they just
Yeah.
can't, like, you only see solutions through like what you have currently and can't really see like a totally different paradigm shift. And so I think a lot of the AI today is solving like a faster horse problem where you're taking the stack model we have from work and you are applying technology to that, and you're trying to like add intelligence or add automation or do whatever, but the entire end user computing stack of like devices, endpoints, applications, data, browsers, connections, security tokens, all these things, that entire thing, our whole world, when you look at the cognitive stack, only it all compresses down into that 20%. And so there's this whole 80%, which previously was all inside our heads. And it was like that for the past, like, when did IT begin to exist? In the 1950s or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the past 70 years, everything IT has been doing has been operating at that 20%. So I think what's most important for us to recognize is, again, it's a stack. That 20% is important. Without that 20%, none of this functions, none of this matters. So I'm not trying to say that like nothing in IT we've done for the past 70 years matters, but I'm just saying like recognize where we're at, and everything we're doing is sort of down here. And if you really want to look at the future, we have to think about the layers that are on top of everything that we've been doing. So like, yes, I need endpoints that function. Yes, I need them to be secure. But the security level needs to exist not just in the first, the bottom layers of the stack. That security level the security needs to exist like
Across the
whole
stack, yeah.
yeah. And here's a problem with this and why I tie it back to faster horse. So when you work at the bottom 20% of the stack, where we all work today, where everything we do, and again, very important, must exist. I cannot understate that enough. We're all fine. Like everything we do still exists in 5 years, for sure. I'll caveat that for a second, but when you work at the bottom of the stack, that's fine. But when you start looking at how AI is impacting that top, like the cognitive portion of the stack, as I said, in my world, everything I'm doing is at the top of the stack coming down. So infrastructure and all that sort of stuff just exists to serve what's coming out of like my kind of AI cognitive extension. The reason I mentioned this, I kind of said this as sort of a throwaway comment, but like, let's think about that for a second. I don't use Microsoft Word anymore unless I need to interface with a colleague who is not using like a second brain. Because I've got colleagues who are using like AI as a second brain also. And like we said, it's basically like a file full of like Markdown. There's a lot of different ways to do the second brain. Check YouTube or Reddit. It's blowing up right now. It's a database. It's a Markdown file. It doesn't matter what. But like I have a colleague who's doing this. And, we store our second brains in GitHub, privately. And when we want to connect with each other, we just actually set up GitHub submodules that we share within our second brains. So I have like, if I'm sharing a second brain with you, I have like, oh, let James know this. And it writes it in the instructions for what it's going to James. And then it checks it in and it goes in that module and your second brain sees it, pulls it down, and then it just gets integrated into what you're doing. So if it's some idea, like for a topic we're doing next week, you don't need to have to send an email and then you process and synthesize and acknowledge. It just goes in. And then next time you are like working on that, it's just there automatically. I'm not using email to talk to you. I'm not using Teams to talk to you. I'm not texting you. And by the way, we are doing this today. I have many colleagues at Citrix, and this is how we work. So Teams is an old compatibility layer. Word is an old compatibility layer. To-do lists are an old compatibility layer. Pretty much all of Microsoft Office is an old compatibility layer. And so in this world, like I said, the only reason things get rendered into Office documents, which now is like a non-updating point in time rendered snapshot that's like almost obsolete the second it's sent out. They only, like, to me, these legacy applications like the Office suite are pure compatibility layers for legacy people who are not yet using this kind of second brain, which again, that's 99.9% of the world, but I'm living a little bit in the future. But again,
well, it's your job.
This is not, and this is with the models that exist today. This is what we're doing.
Yeah.
This is not.
No, Ethan Mollick, I think, said it. I think it was the other day. He said it like, we have enough AI for the next 20 or 30 years with what we've got now. So, if someone like that is saying it, then it's just we haven't. I think, as you said, most people haven't kind of figured out how to get from that kind of 20% layered and open up the 80% of the abilities you can achieve with AI.
Yeah, and because the reason, so it's complicated because again, if everything we've been doing in IT compresses down to just that 20%, like in my world, there's no applications. Now, there might be some, like, some applications are an interface to like a data set. So like if I want to buy a flight, you have to use our existing flying system, which I can do myself. An agent can do it. It doesn't really matter because again, that's my cognitive load does not come from using Workday,
Yeah.
And so if there's no applications, what? Where do we lock down? What? Everything I do is like, well, here's an application and here's a vendor and I'm going to have this and here's the troubleshooting and here's the ACLs and here's how I do it and here's my RBAC and here's all the permissions and here's how I audit it and here's how I track this and everything. And if that disappears, what? Like, where am I applying my security policies? What am I doing? Like, what? Like, what is my desktop used for? If like, what are you doing? This breaks everything. And so, what? By the way, so this is the world that I live in. So like, where does this operate? Like, what happens if you have this cognitive brain? This cognitive extension. You're using AI in that way. Obviously, for a corporation, you want to bring that into your corporate environment so you can apply the controls. But the controls are not the same control. Like conceptually, they're the same. I want to understand what the worker is, what the data they're seeing. Now this is talking. We're talking about tokens. Instead of packets, we're talking about like MCP data sources. Yes, you can put little firewalls inside there and look at it, but DLP changes completely because you can't do DLP rules based on regex and scripts. When you're like looking at cognitive things, and so it really does kind of fundamentally change everything. And so this is like the challenge for the traditional stack, because again, everything that exists in that 20% still needs to exist. The way that we implement it might be different, but there are compliance. I need to have data that's stored. I need to understand where PII exists and how it's maintained. Like, all these compliance issues still exist. It's just the fundamental approach to how you sort of like solve for those is completely different when, this invisible, what was previously invisible is now made visible. Because I might have PII information in my brain, right? Like I know this customer, this customer, this customer. Like, so it exists. It's just not like written down anywhere. It's not been digitized. And when you use AI as a cognitive extension, you take that 80% of work and you now digitize that. And now it's quantified, it's moved around, it's traded, it's moved. And like you need all the things you need at this other stack, routers and application layers and application access. And all these things have to exist, but it's operating at this level. And it's just a fundamentally new approach. And that's, so I think all the work we're doing down here at the 20%, we still need to do, we as an industry. And it's very, very important because this 80% collapses if it doesn't have the infrastructure foundation. And that has to be secure and performant and all those things. But we need to understand that, like, when we have the best, most secure automation layer and endpoint layer and all these things down at this level, we need to understand that itself is not the end game. That is building the solid foundation so that we can do the work in the 80% on top of that.
Okay. I have to take a minute. It's like,
this is what we're building. This is what we think about.
Yeah. No, I get it. But at the same time, it's like we've been so focused on what we do within EUC. It's a fundamental shift, and I think, you live it day in, day out, but most people don't. So it's going to take a bit of time in that. But I understand what you're saying essentially. So yeah,
it's interesting. I'll say, so let's talk about that, the bit of time. So I've told this story before, as you can imagine. A lot of people are skeptical on the timelines of things, right? Or they're like, okay, I get that. A lot of people, like, I can bring people along on this journey up until this point, and then where we diverge is they're like, okay, but that's like, in 5 years. And I'm like, well, okay, maybe, probably not. Because think about, like I said earlier, all the timeframes I had laid out. And when I wrote that 7-layer timeframe, I had already been working for like 3 decades in end user computing, and I was wrong by like many orders of magnitude at how fast this happens. I did an article on the Citrix blog last week about this. Actually, I think it was the one where I introduced the cognitive stack. I don't know, maybe not. It doesn't matter. Look at coding at like software development as like the canary in the coal mine for knowledge work. Software developers went from well, it's fancy autocomplete. I'm using it here, but I'm using this. Look what happened in November when Claude 4.5, Gemini 3, ChatGPT 5.3, when all those came out back in November. Suddenly AI was like really, really good at software development. And it wasn't because the models got smarter. They're all the same base models. It's just that they got better at like maintaining long tasks and like checking on their tasks and checking their progress and kind of like not getting lost and everything. And you saw those came out in November. By December, the whole world of like software coding had blown up. You saw like Spotify's like, we don't write code anymore. You saw like dark factories making software. You saw like all these very famous developers being like, oh my God, this changes everything. Like, we don't have to write code and it's perfect. I mean, any errors it's making is due to specifications or no more errors than what humans would make. And like all these kind of skeptics who were just like, yeah, AI will write software like in 5 years, to like, oh my God, I don't write any more code anymore. Like, and that happened in like 2 weeks. And so I think, you would have taken software developers who just said, who believe that same thing. It's gonna take too long to change. And then here it is. I'm telling you, I've always looked at software development as a canary in the coal mine for what's happening in knowledge work. Look at my own use case, because what makes AI really good at software development also makes it really good at knowledge work. I think the reason we fail in the knowledge work world is because we're stuck down in that bottom 20% of that stack. And like maybe AI isn't good at building all these automations, and computer using agents are getting confused. And it's like, well, how can my AI do this if it can't even click Excel properly? I'm like, who cares? I can click Excel. I don't need AI to do that. Like it's this 80% up here where the real money is. And that has been instantly changed. Like for me, when I started using AI like this second brain, it was probably within like 2 hours where I was like, oh my God. And like within 2 days, I'm like, I'm never working the old way again. Like never.
Mm.
And so it's like, I think it's going to be slow and then fast. Like everything with AI happens slowly until it doesn't, and then it just like hockey stick shoots straight up.
Yeah.
And everything I'm talking about is possible today. You don't even have to have like the permission of your company to start using AI in this way. What I'm saying is not even an AI product. It's not vibe coding. It's just it's like a usage pattern for AI. And so the the idea that humans using AI in this way, like today's AI is really, really good at working this way. It's actually better at this than it is automations and using computers, you know? And so I do not believe that this is multiple years of workers doing this. I mean, I feel like, I, I mean, you go to YouTube, go to Reddit, go to anywhere, go to LinkedIn. Like there's hundreds of thousands of people working this way. And what I'm talking about literally did not exist 4 months ago.
Mm.
So I think we're going to see this really, really quickly, and companies are going to have to real quick figure out what does this mean, and how do I think about like how do I even approach this? How do I even begin? I don't think this is. You don't have 2 years, truly. I don't think so.
Okay. So just to kind of to wrap this up.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you for a specific prediction. You've just given it that this thing is going to absolutely accelerate. So if we're talking, you're at a company, and how do you prepare for this? If you're a corporate enterprise company, or even like a vendor, do you what do you do to kind of future proof your company?
Um, to me, the the number one best thing you can do is just start to use AI in this way. And you can Google search for like second brain, cognitive extension, how to set up. I mean, there's like a million YouTube videos on how to do this. Everyone does it differently, which is actually part of the value of why this works so well, because like your brain and my brain work differently. But when you're setting up AI, like it literally is, use Claude Cowork or Claude Code or what, it doesn't matter what you use. Like give it a folder in your computer and say, I want you to operate like my second brain. It's like just throwing more and more into it, but everything you add in, it's going to run through and like, okay, pull up my threads, pull up my ideas, pull up my things, just start using it this way. And in my case, I like within 2 hours was like, oh my God, this is wild. Cause it's like, when you add files into like like a chat window, and you can like add in like here's some PDFs and some stuff, and you
Yeah,
get
yeah.
a really, really good session now. Like, oh man, this is so good. I got so much good context in here. Imagine if it's like that, but like that can be for everything, and those files can keep on updating instead of being static. Just drag and drop them in. Um, the first thing you have to do is just start using it and just understand like, whoa, like this is really possible today. And even if it doesn't hook in with your company, I started mine like not related to my employer at all. I only pulled in information that like I had already published publicly, and like started just recording thoughts and stuff like that, and just trying to get it in there and process. Um, to me, the first step is just to understand like what's capable today and how powerful it is as a knowledge worker when you start using AI this way. And then the second step is to like think through that cognitive stack, and then understand, like I said, these automations, like the business that you live in, Citrix is very much involved in like you want endpoints, you want them to be self-healing, you want them to work well. Like that's so important. And it's like everything. If you have a crumbly foundation, everything on top of it is going to be like unstable.
Yeah. Well, that's a valid point, I think, because we've seen a lot of stuff around this automations, but then you figure out that you mentioned skills earlier, but essentially, like if you what I've seen is like companies have, yes, they have a process, and then everyone has a variation in the process, and then when you implement an agent, the agent goes rogue because you haven't documented the processes properly. So this is kind of where I feel a lot of companies are. They have to kind of start with the data and the processes, and then you kind of accelerate through AI. Because if you don't have the data correct and the processes correct, then it's not going to go well.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, you know how in the VDI Delusion, to bring this full circle, on the cover we had a picture of like a hammer pounding in a screw.
Yeah.
This whole thing, like when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's kind of
Mm,
where AI and end user computing are today, where it's like, well, we have our existing tools and our existing stack, so let's just do more of that. And like I said, that's important, but recognize that's only on that 20% of the foundation, and everything you're doing at the automation layer has nothing to do with like this AI as a cognitive extension for your workers. And
mm,
so, if you want to secure your workers who are using AI like a cognitive extension, of course, whatever working space they're using, whatever devices they're using, those also have to be secure, because it does no good to like secure the cognition if their laptop is screen recording everything, or the microphone is on and it's like leaking everything out the door, or whatever, right? So having an understanding of what's operating at those layers is very important. But I think it's also important to be realistic. Like once you start using AI as a cognitive extension, you realize the infrastructure layers for what they are. Like that is an important layer that must be secure within my stack, but also I'm not going to automate my way to super intelligence. Like there's
mm,
just like that's not where the value is. So automations, you know, like, yeah, when I'm using AI at this layer and then my AI has to go do something, it might have to navigate through like, oh, I need to talk to this system. The skill describes like, okay, well, here's the logon, here's the key, here's how you use it. The automation steps through and actually does that and pulls the data in that I need. And maybe it goes through the checks and firewalls and DLPs and whatever. Like super, that's how it should work. But
mm,
let's recognize like the intelligence is coming out of here at this higher layer. And that's just like we're at that layer, you're automating the infrastructure layer. So I think it's once you start using AI in this way and starting to see how truly transformative it is when you have AI impacting like the 80% of the what was previously invisible, then you can be very realistic for like the value that you get out of automating your lower levels of the infrastructure, and understanding like that for what it is. Like it's very important to automate, and yes, you can use AI, and yes, you must have good security at those levels. But understand that that is so that you can provide a solid foundation for the higher levels. It is not, again, you're not automating your way. Like no amount of computer using agents
mm.
like is going to pop out super intelligence on the top. That's just not how it works. So it's so important to secure the environment, to enable your workers, to secure your workers, to understand like what they're using and how they're using it. But it's important to understand how it fits in that overall stack. And I think once you start using AI as a true cognitive extension, you recognize, oh, okay, here's what this is, here's my value there, and here's what this is, and here's my value there.
Okay. That that's been incredible. Brian, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this stuff. It is, you and I have been both working for decades. It is very, very fascinating in our industry right
Yeah,
now. And I wake up every day excited, truly, to work on this stuff. Like it's really, really a fun time to be doing what we're doing.
perfect. Well, thank you very much for your time, and we will see you on the next episode. Thank you very much.